Hey, hello, and thank you all for coming. I'm just going to go ahead and wait a minute or two before we get started. I want to give folks some time at home to sign in. Feel free to grab some water, a snack, kind of situate yourselves. We will go ahead and get started in just a minute. Let's see. Okay, thank you all for being here on a Thursday night. Tonight, we will be hearing from 3 different photographers about their work with both photography and in their community. I will get us started by introducing myself first. My name is Cassie, and I'm the Community Engagement Specialist for Friends of Columbia Gorge, and I will be the host for tonight's webinar. And before I introduce tonight's speakers, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. I know many folks at home have already used Zoom before, but I just want to go over a few things. First, you will notice that your screen is turned off and everyone is on mute. This is to make sure that the speakers are able to be seen and heard by everyone. You are not able to unmute, but you are still able to participate. If you look at the very bottom of your screen, you will see a green button in the middle that says Q&A. This is the best way for you to submit any questions you may have for our speakers. Many folks at home will be tempted to type in their question into the chat function, which you can also do. However, there is a chance that your question will not be seen if it is typed not using the Q&A button. So make sure you hit the green Q&A button if you would like to ask a question to our panelists. If you have a question for a specific panelist and photographer, please include their name in your question. Otherwise, I will present your question to the entire panel. All questions will be answered at the end of the presentations, but you are welcome to submit your question at any time. Lastly, this webinar will be recorded and available for viewing on our YouTube channel. And before I begin, I want to honor the indigenous people who lived in the gorge since time immemorial before being forcefully removed and relocated by settler colonization and the United States government. Through the treaties of 1855 between tribes and the United States government, the Warm Springs, Yakima, Nez Perce, and Umatilla retained rights to these lands to this day. The United States was given the right to live and govern on these lands if we honor and uphold those treaties. Friends supports the tribes in their efforts to defend the rights they reserved through these treaties. Tribal people have greatly influenced the gorge preservation and still do today as leading conservationists and original caretakers of this land. And now a little bit about us, Friends of Columbia Gorge. Friends of the Columbia Gorge is the only conservation group entirely dedicated to protecting, preserving, and stewarding the Columbia Gorge for future generations. For over 40 years, we've worked to protect, enhance the scenic, natural, cultural, and recreational resources of the gorge. In addition to this webinar, we are also announcing our 7th annual photo contest entitled Our Gorge Connections, sponsored by Pro Photo Supply. This year, we have many different categories, including waterfalls, wildflowers, wildlife, and youth photographer for any aspiring student photographer. We will also be offering a special prize this year for the best photo taken on a mobile device. You don't need professional equipment to participate. Our goal is to encourage and inspire photographers of all levels. We will go ahead and put a link to this photo contest in the chat. Take a look and consider submitting your favorite gorge photos. As a reminder, all photos must be taken within the Columbia River Gorge scenic area and must be submitted by February 6th. And now to introduce tonight's panelists. First, we will hear from photographer Ken Pitts. Ken is a sustainability educator working for Oregon Metro as an outreach specialist for grades 6 through 12. He is a volunteer for Gorge Refuge Stewards and spends his free days photographing wildlife and helping others fall in love with nature. Next, we will have Linda Steider, a wildlife photographer who is passionate about birds and wildlife. She works with a number of organizations, including Cascades Peak Watch, East Cascades Audubon Society, and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Linda also co-owns a gallery and shop in Hood River called Made in the Gorge. Our final panelist for the night will be Nic Raingsey. Nic is a photographer and advocate focused on amplifying diversity and representation in the outdoors. He is a leader for PDX Climbers of Color and a photographer for Climbers of Color located in Seattle. He is currently pursuing an outdoor industry MBA to continue his work in the outdoors. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to our first panelist, Ken Pitts.
Good evening. Hopefully you are seeing that farm now. I would like to start by telling a little bit about myself, my story. I basically fell in love with nature as a kid on this Texas Panhandle dairy farm. It may not look very great, but I actually spent every waking moment when I wasn't helping my dad with chores, walking around the pastures and learning the tendencies of every creature that I could find there. I brought that deep love of nature to my 33 years of being a biology teacher and environmental science teacher. Students from Texas, Kansas, Pennsylvania, and then California benefited from my invitation to them to fall in love with nature. I fought hard to get students outside the classroom walls where I was always looking out the window when I was a kid. And you can see here, a field trip that I took of students in my biology class in California to get them out into the canyon, under the canyon live oaks in the Santa Ana Mountains. 7 years ago, I was able to get my dream job working for Oregon Metro as a sustainability educator. As an outreach specialist, I am able to talk to nearly 20,000 students in the last 7 years, grades 6 through 12. I've used my wildlife photography to connect more deeply with those students and increase their empathy for nature. I do this 3 days a week, and the other 4, I am outside as much as possible. My go-to place since moving here has been Steigerwald National Wildlife Refuge. I love going there because it is quieter and I'm a bird by sound guy. I want to hear nature. I was invited by Gorge Refuge Stewards volunteer coordinator, Jared Strouderman, to lead guided walks. And over the last 5 years, here are some of the ways I have volunteered. I've been a part of the DEI committee for the last couple of years, trying to make this a more welcoming place for all people. I have done youth photography walks, judged photography contest, and I spend the majority of my time with this one, just interacting with visitors. And I have 178 bird species on my list for Steigerwald. I've also really enjoyed doing nature therapy walks, not sponsored necessarily by Steigerwald, but by meeting people there. And then I am I am a co-leader for the Steigerwald photography group. And if you want to have some fun, join us. It's a great group. And we are learning to share screens by now after all this time with COVID. This is a composite photo taken from the trail that doesn't exist anymore. Steigerwald is going through a massive restoration project. It's been in the making for many years, and the last 3 years been off and on closed, and it's closed now. I created this from a 10 millimeter wide angle shot on a tripod, and then added a 500 millimeter shot from the same location of a northern harrier. I do this art because of the feeling I get when I see this picture and how this is more the way my eyes experience Steigerwald. Steigerwald is a place that does my soul wonders, as I have spent as much as every daylight hour on some days just being there. Being nourished by nature's gifts, I use my photography to try to convey that feeling I get while experiencing the never-ending variations of sky and clouds, open wetlands, changing forests, river views, and animal inhabitants like these tundra swans flying over. Long-tailed weasels are seen on the paths quite often, and curiously and energetically, they interact with visitors sometimes. They surprise you. One of my favorite moments was when I was leading a nature therapy walk with people recovering from drug addiction. A young man was walking with me, but he never spoke for 2 hours. We came upon a lady standing on the trail, and a weasel was coming out of the grass and running over her shoe. We approached quietly and respectfully and stood next to her. When the weasel came out and was within a few feet of us, it seemed to be loving her shoestrings. And the first words I heard from the young man was, "This is the greatest day of my life." Steigerwald's harriers, like this male, are a signature bird, always present and inviting photographers to try. Here you can see the hen northern harrier taking flight from a post as I waited patiently with her in a walker past us and disturbed her. This harrier hen is known by our Steigerwald photography group as Margaret. She is looking at me like, "Really, Ken? Is photographing me in the rain a good idea?" Another signature bird is the American bittern, always present but seldom seen. And the easiest way I've noticed to find them is to find somebody with a scope that is looking at one. I have set a personal record here for bitterns. I was observing 4 that were hiding in the grass and doing their characteristic chunk calls when 3 more flew into the area. So I had 7 bitterns in my field of vision at one time. Which is a personal record for me. Some of my favorite moments with wildlife, red currants flower near the parking lot. What was the parking lot of Steigerwald in late March? They nourish rufous hummingbirds with their nectar as they migrate. This picture was featured in the 2020 edition of Cornell Lab's Lab of Ornithology's calendar for April. And again, this is a rufous hummingbird. Seeing ruby red pop from a tiny ruby crown kinglet many years ago helped get me hooked on the surprises that creatures weighing only 0.2 of an ounce have to offer. These are tiny birds. I cannot wait for Steigerwald to reopen after nearly 3 years being part of this restoration project, and that happens this spring. And I hope to see you out there. Another gorge spot I frequent for photography is the Sandy River Delta. It's close to home for me. I know it's known for its dog park, but for me, it's now known for a go-to place for Elijah Light buntings. 8 years ago, when I saw one, this was a gateway drug into nature photography and birding for me. I just couldn't believe it when I got this with my binoculars and took a look at it. The Delta is also a place that you can see red-eyed vireos consistently during the summer. And its berry thickets host yellow-breasted chats. The riparian forests near Company Lake on that delta have great horned owls. And watch the eyes of this one. It was watching me. It kind of woke up and was looking at me, but it wasn't super disturbed. But suddenly there were dogs behind me. And you can see the owls is showing stress as it looks out at those dogs. My goal with all owl encounters is to leave them asleep as I move away from them, which this one did. She just fell asleep. This moves us further east in the gorge to the Women's Forum observation point, and which of course inspires nature photographers, our wildlife photographers, to become landscape photographers. It's a beautiful, beautiful observation point. The waterfall areas, trails, and roads of the Middle Gorge offer more than just landscape photos. This is a Claudius parnassium butterfly on meadow salsify, and this is on the Washington side up near its large mountain. And if you go to the Oregon side, on the way up to its large mountain, this is one of my favorite warbler pictures of all times. It just came and sat on a perch right next to me. This is a McGilver's warbler. And photographers out there will probably resonate with me in appreciating getting a good photo of one of these. The pikas are some of the lowest altitude populations known here in the gorge. and they require lower temperatures and actually decline at temperatures above 77 degrees Fahrenheit. And I just want to share that I was empathetically sick thinking about them on those days of 109, 112, and 116, record-setting days at the end of June. 3 days later, I went to see if they were still alive, and I would like to share a video I took the moment that one first showed up. I was there by its rock pile, its talus pile, and I just want to share this moment with you because it was a very good moment. In fact, it was an absolutely joyous moment. I couldn't see it with my eyes, but I was able to see it underneath the tree through my viewfinder. And I just will share with you, there were actually tears in my eyes as I looked at that and saw that it had survived the heat. But I also want to share with you that as I went down the gorge, that joy went away. And it was one of the most depressing days for me for a long time. I mean, there's a lot of things that make me depressed, but this is a video. I did this for climateproject.org. I'm a trained ambassador. If you have a climate story and you want to tell it, be sure and contact me afterward, and I would love to talk to you and get your story.
Hi, my name is Ken Pitts, and I live in Portland, Oregon. Today I'm standing here next to the Columbia River and Cascade Locks, right in the center of the gorge. Wildlife photography is my hobby, and I'm happiest when I spend entire days photographing bald eagles and harriers, owls, herons, bitterns, and any other species who show up. The fishing specialists here, ospreys, are one of my favorite gorge species. They return here in the spring in pairs to build nests and raise their young after they hatch in late June. The chicks are ready to fledge from their nest in early August. I have observed 4 nesting pairs here, and they have successfully raised young for the last 6 years until this summer. Forced by a changing climate, our area set 3 all-time temperature records as we came to the end of June, right after all the osprey eggs hatched. Our all-time record of 107 degrees fell on Saturday with 108, on Sunday with 111, and Monday it was destroyed at 116. I wondered how the young osprey chicks stuck in their nest, exposed to the intense sunlight and heat, could possibly survive. So I checked their nest on Thursday. All of the 4 osprey nests failed. It all set weirdly along the trees, along the river, unpaired, away from their nest, and nearly motionless. I grieve. I so look forward to photographing them with their nest-centered lives. This is a loss I feel as an ache in my stomach. Will there be osprey returning to our rivers next year? What other lives were impacted? I feel a better future would first include a turning away from thinking that material things are what make us happy. That future would include focusing on what we truly need: healthy relationships with land and people. Valuing all lives and scaling down our extraction and replacing toxic carbon-spewing fossil fuels with renewable energies might give us a chance. I want to be a part of forging a positive pathway forward by simplifying my lifestyle, including moving toward only using renewable energy. I will continue to bring climate change education to our youth and engage with members of my faith community as we learn to be allies of frontline people already slammed by a warming planet. I will use my vote to move our governments to change rules to value all voices, not just those of the wealthy. My motivation for continuing this work will include looking into the eyes of thousands of diverse and forward-thinking youth as I engage with them in our region. I will look into my granddaughter's eyes while working towards the best climate scenarios in their futures. I will continue to look into the eyes of the osprey and the gorge as I desire to see them and photograph them next summer and beyond. May it be so.
Okay. So, yeah, I do feel a great amount of empathy for these animals and for nature. And one of my favorite places to just go and be with nature has grown to be, since I can't be at Steigerwald, Catherine Creek. It is a place that here you see like this just amazing sunset as the clouds were ended at Lyle, and you can see Lyle there, and then the sun coming up underneath that. The trails there are inviting, and the trees have a lot of the small birds in them, and an abundance of birds, including this red-breasted nuthatch that is characteristically moving down the trunk. This golden crown kinglet. Again, these are about 0.2 ounce birds, about the size of a hummingbird weight-wise. Here it's just expressing its dissatisfaction with me. This is a ruby crown kinglet, not popping its ruby. And one that's just a really unique species there is the Lewis's woodpecker. They will hawk insects from tree branches, but this time of year you'll find them harvesting acorns and finding what I call a tool tree to lodge them in, and then hammering them to split the slivers like this one has done successfully. But what a cool looking bird. Here's a photograph at on down the gorge that is at Crawford Oaks, and everything just came together. All the light happened to be right on the tree, on the back hills and everything, and two mountain bikers rode by. So it was kind of a perfect moment for me. The last place I want to show you is was actually done on Black Friday. I went to the Deschutes River State Park, and my goal was to see a rock wren for the first time. Well, obviously I did see a rock wren for the first time. And what I did is I found a place where I knew they were. I positioned myself so that the sun was at my back and basically just sat for 2 to 3 hours. I had heard them in the rocks, and then over the next several hours, basically they just came right in front of my tripod at different times and spread out. I also saw the canyon wren, and all of these were personal best pictures for me. And kind of a bonus bird here, Say's Phoebe, landed just right there in front of my tripod. So that was a good day for me. What I'd like to do is to end with, I'd like for us to consider the example of this Say's Phoebe, who, like me, got lucky, happened to position himself where the insect flew right into its mouth. I too showed up and positioned myself to receive the gifts of nature. And my photography is an invitation to you to position yourself to receive those gifts of nature that nature has to offer. And most of all, to fall in love. Because we fight for those we love, it is with deepest gratitude that I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ken, for sharing all of your favorite places in the gorge to take photos, and some of those photos. I personally really love the hummingbird photos. I'm amazed at how detailed you can get those. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Linda. Linda, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. This is home. This is literally where I've lived for the last 3 decades and where my heart is. And I know how lucky I am to live here. My passion and strongest connection is with our wildlife and birds. My first camera was a gift for my 10th birthday. I've always loved the view from behind the lens. My background is visual arts. Using my photos as reference material, I would collage the photos, then work out a sketch for composition, color, and detail. In the late 80s, I began showing art quilts in galleries. Some of my sketches turned into pastel paintings that I sold through galleries and weekend art shows. I also worked with arts and education for a number of years. In the mid to late 90s, I transitioned to glass. And around 2009, friends told me that my photos should be shown. So I also put those into my galleries. By the end of 2014, I was having a lot of fun, but I was overloaded with weekend art shows, galleries, and teaching on the national circuit. So I returned to my first love, photography, at the beginning of 2015, a simpler life and nature. My photographic journey is often a quest for information, education for myself, and in turn for others. I volunteer for a few agencies offering my skills to place myself with wildlife so I learn more about them. And I get to hang out with people who make a difference. I love the challenge of capturing anything in motion, from the smallest woolly bear to the largest black bear, from deer and elk to squirrels and chipmunks. By quietly capturing the essence of each creature, I hope to compel others to learn and care about it, especially if that caring turns to conservation or protection. As I wander trails and back roads, I stop when I come across something interesting, whether it's a coyote, a raccoon, bighorn sheep on the east side, or river otters and muskrats in many of our waterways. I plant my garden to attract birds, bees, and butterflies. Both of these are Anna's hummingbirds, a bumblebee on a lavender plant, and this bumblebee in the wild, a swallowtail on Jupiter's beard, and a tortoiseshell on a little blue flower. I practice photographing them to keep my skills quick and reliable. That way, when I'm in the field looking for a warbling vireo at Horsethief Butte, I can pivot to the monarch butterfly who suddenly appears. And I share my images on social media so that those who can't get out on a trail or even into a garden can enjoy all we have in our backyard. Often that's people in wheelchair, people who are taking care of others and can't get out and enjoy for themselves, people who might be too young or too old. I love capturing family interactions and amplifying their personalities to get viewers to engage with and find empathy for them. This family of osprey was successful on the Columbia River, but the following year, the chicks were lost when a huge windstorm swept their nest into the river. A family of western bluebirds that had just fledged at Klickitat Wildlife Area, sitting on a branch. I'm sure they're looking at their dad for advice. A family of great horned owls I discovered near my property. And you can tell I'm not disturbing them because mom's eyes are closed. She's not alert or watching me, not concerned at all. A family of sandhill cranes. It looks like the colt is getting a lesson in manners. All my images are taken from a respectful distance with a 500mm lens and often cropped. I never knowingly interfere with the lives of these beings, but I do want to know what they eat. The male red-tailed hawk in front had just brought a rodent for his mate in the nest. A group of bald eagles arguing over a salmon carcass at the Little White Salmon River. And on the left, a mountain bluebird found in high prairie eating a big fat green grub, and a western bluebird taking a large insect to a nearby nest. This is a ruby-crowned kinglet checking out some juicy flies caught in a spider's web. I like observing how they hunt, like this great blue heron intent on frogs at Bingen Marina, which, by the way, is rich in birds and wildlife. A male northern harrier, also called a gray ghost, soaring low over a field in Dallsport. An American kestrel hunting a meadow under a beautiful blue winter sky. And a red-tailed hawk soaring over the Columbia Hills area. When possible, I watch how they set up their homes, like this pair of osprey rearranging furniture. or this female burrowing owl joining her mate on their perch at the Umatilla Chemical Depot. I volunteered there with the Global Owl Project for burrow restoration. I helped with banding and was privileged to hold owls in my hands. Dr. David Johnson has gathered a team of amazing participants during his 12-year study of these owls, and it was an honor to be among them. Bald eagle along the Columbia River calling for her mate from their nest. And if I'm lucky, I get to see how they raise their young. This is one of the owlets found near my property. A tiny killdeer chick at Convoy Lake National Wildlife Refuge. A pair of fawns whose spots are almost gone on the wild side of my property. And this adorable red-tailed hawk chick stretching its tiny wings. I'm grateful for each and every encounter that comes my way. This is my 6th season of volunteering for East Cascades Audubon, conducting winter raptor surveys. And I've learned a lot about them as a result. We have over 500 routes, now covering Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and parts of California and Utah. Our manager uses some of my images to educate others on identification. I catch my breath when I find a falcon. On the left is a prairie falcon, and a peregrine falcon is on the right. I have volunteered for WDFW, surveying both. A great horned owl resting in a barn opening that I almost missed because I was looking in a nearby tree, which is where he normally roosts. I didn't see him in the barn window until I was leaving. Another of my favorites is the rough-legged hawk seen here in flight on the east side. Golden eagles are generally found north and east of Lyle. Oops. And some raptors are often mistaken for one another, such as this young bald eagle and a dark morph red-tailed hawk. More frequently, identifications are confused between young bald and golden eagles. Other large birds that captivate me are turkey vultures, who typically arrive in March. Black-crowned night herons, who often overwinter here but are easily disturbed. Tundra swans are common in late fall through winter in several locations. We've also had a few trumpeters show up in recent years. American pelicans can be found at the John Day and the Dalles Dams in summer months. And I'm attracted to unusual birds like the northern shrike found in the eastern gorge. I still think they should be included in the raptor category. With over 250 species of birds found here, I'll just show you a few of my favorites, like the western on the left and the eastern kingbird, both found at Convoy Lake National Wildlife Refuge. It's one of my favorite spots to hang out. When I find something fun or different at the refuge, I share it with the manager there. Some opposites are a meadowlark in the drier eastern side of the gorge and a Pacific wren on the rainier west side. A belted kingfisher at the Little White Salmon River, and a western tanager near the base of Mount Adams. And the American dippers are found in many of our rivers and streams. This one is at Spring Creek Fish Hatchery. Both dippers and osprey will dive underwater for their prey. Some woodpeckers found in the gorge are the acorn and Lewis's, both found in oak habitat. White-headed woodpeckers can be difficult to find in forested areas, while red-breasted sapsuckers are quite common and literally found everywhere. Pileated woodpeckers are found in many of our gorge forests at high and low elevations. And this is a hairy woodpecker at his nest cavity on the left compared to a downy woodpecker on the right, who's smaller and has a shorter beak. I do photograph landscapes while waiting and watching for movement on a trail. But my excitement really stems from finding other beings, including dragonflies, snakes, frogs, and lizards, all of which I'm not as knowledgeable about. In closing, I'll leave you with the cutest mammal on the planet, the American pika. I enjoy sharing pika knowledge with people who express interest. Pikas are not always easy to spot. You have to look up, down, and all around. And if while looking around you find me with a plush toy pika in my backpack, stop and say hello. The toy is to show kids what I'm looking for, and if I've found one, I'll show them pictures on the back of my camera. I love introducing kids to these cute little mammals. Most pikas are found at alpine elevations, but our gorge pikas are the only one near sea level. You can find them on many gorge trails, especially near our waterfall areas. I've studied them extensively and volunteer with Cascades Pika Watch. After the Eagle Creek fire, we conducted abundant surveys as soon as we could get in. We climbed over talus looking for any evidence of survivors. Initially, there was a 40% survival rate, but their numbers have steadily increased in the years since. Nature is my sanctuary, and I have a spiritual connection with it. I give birds and wildlife space when I encounter them, and I travel their habitat as quietly as possible. As we humans close in on wildlife habitat, whether cohabitating or recreating, I hope that we become more aware and tuned in to their needs and save space for all things wild. There's a delicate balance between life and death that wild creatures face every day. I leave sections of my property untamed, including a few snags, and I'm planting more natives. During summer months, I seem to spend more time with pika than I do with people. Among my favorite images, this pika looks ferocious, but was actually stretching and yawning. Then he fell asleep right in front of me. You can go back and recreate, or I'm sorry, you cannot go back and recreate an encounter with wildlife. So when it happens, I am fully in that magical moment. Whether or not it results in a photo, I relish and delight in it, but a photo is always good. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Those photos were incredible. My particular favorite was the pika with the flower in its mouth. It was beautiful. Just a reminder to everyone who is watching, if you have any questions, you don't need to wait till the end of the presentation. Feel free to go ahead and type your question into the Q&A function. Okay, and I'll go ahead and pass it on to our last photographer, Nic.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassie. Hi, everybody. As Cassie said, my name is Nic Raingsey. I am a photographer and I am a community advocate for diverse representation for outdoors and media in general. I'm also an outdoor industry MBA student looking to scale my work in diversity, equity, and inclusion from a grassroots level over to something larger, so the outdoor industry at large, in hopes to open doors for others like myself to influence better representation in front of the lens, behind the lens, and also better representation in the field and in the office. So you can see my purpose there. My why in doing all of this is to engage, inspire, and elevate others through the power of perspective. So when I say perspective, I mean not only through photos and visually, but I also mean through sharing stories of personal experience. And so what better story and experience to tell than my own? So that is what I'm going to do. So now I was born here in the area. This is me being born. Just kidding, I wasn't actually born at Rainier. I was born in Clackamas, Oregon. For those of you who are from the area, Sunnyside Hospital. But I've lived in Vancouver, Washington most of my life. So I am a Gorge native. I'm very familiar and kind of the increasingly rare local around the area. And so while there was a lot of opportunity to adventure outdoors here growing up in the Gorge, it was really hard to navigate for me, largely because my family immigrated here as refugees. They survived genocide in Cambodia, where approximately 2 million Cambodians died. And just for numbers' sake, this means 1 in 4 people. Some additional perspective around that: I'm from a family of 5. My sister and I were born here, and had either of us been born there, we probably wouldn't be here today. So this is a bit off topic, but I wanted to mention it because it gives context into what I do. If you don't know the history, I really urge you to learn a little bit about it. And feel free to reach out to me if you'd like. I will be leaving my info at the end of the presentation. Anyhow, we really didn't have anyone to show us around the area and how to outdoor recreate the way I do nowadays. And the internet wasn't a thing then. I'm kind of aging myself here. And so I was a bit on my own, figuring it out and figuring out how to wade through the barriers that so many BIPOC face And when I say BIPOC, for those that might not be familiar, that stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And so there's a lot of financial barriers and economic barriers to getting outdoors, to buying the gear, to traveling, paying for gas. And that goes into the knowledge. What gear do you need? Where are the places that you want to go? Is it better in one season than in others? Rules and regulations for each of the seasons. And those things are always ever fluctuating, right? But also there's the social and the cultural aspect, which can work as a barrier as well, which was very different for us also. And so my entry into the outdoors was through fishing. I started out with just like a bobber and a worm, right? The very basics. I hardly saw anybody out there who I could identify with or who looked like me that did these activities that I was really interested in. And that was really reflected in the books and the magazines that I'd get from the library to teach myself how to fish, how to camp, and generally do all the things that I'm involved in today. And so for all of these reasons, my trajectory into the outdoors and adventuring was a very slow and mostly independent one. And because of my lived experience, when I found community, I really, really latched onto it super tightly. And so now, having tried to do what I can, I'm trying to do what I can with my interests and my talents to help others on their journey into the outdoors and make it as smooth and welcoming as possible. These photos that you see here are of my friend Tracy. She's the founder of Brown Folks Fishing, a national nonprofit organization looking to expand access to fishing for the BIPOC community. They do their work through storytelling, through grassroots organizing, throwing events, and engaging in building community. So these photos are actually from an event held here at Blue Lake, Oregon, getting people out fishing for their first time. And I'm really proud of this and being able to be involved in this, seeing that this is kind of where my entry point was and being able to see things out essentially full circle. And as I mentioned, I started my journey kind of alone, but really I dragged my sister out on adventures. And I'm really proud of the bond that we've created because of it. And to say that has gone from sharing my knowledge and experience with her, just like the single person, to sharing knowledge and experiences with the greater community. This is a group called PDX Climbers of Color. It is an affinity climbing group that I actually help lead. We look to create equal access to climbing for people of color and other marginalized groups. This is also a group that's really inspired me to shift my career and pursue my MBA and what I'm doing now, and try to bring my skills and talents into the outdoor marketing arena to influence more diverse representation. Through this group, we are trying to shift the narrative from climb it, conquer it, suffer from it, to one that still gives us room to push ourselves beyond our perceived limits and really get through that. But truly emphasizing joy and community above all else. So it's really through this community that I've learned the value of being a photographer doesn't come simply from taking a beautiful photo, right? It's really in creating a relaxed atmosphere of comfort so that people can freely express themselves and come to you not afraid to be wholly themselves and truly authentic. I just want to give a really quick shout out to Rakeem here, who's featured in this photo. He is part of the PDX Climbers of Color leadership team. He's really awesome. He's a veteran Tillman scholar pursuing his doctorate and is also leading another group called POC Hikes. So if you're a hiker in the area, you should really check him out. And through PDX Climbers of Color, I've also learned that mentorship doesn't have to be this long-term relationship from a singular person that we often think of it as, but it can be from an entire community and received in a lot of different forms. So from skills on the rock wall to single moments of making people really feel safe and validated, super important. And maybe it's words of affirmation that tell you you are exactly where you need to be. you are where you should be. Or maybe it's celebrating pushing your limits with inspiring photos just like these. And in the end, just simply sharing those joyful moments for others and the community to see and embrace. These pictures here are from a climbing clinic that we did in partnership with Luis from Everybody Climbs, who owns and operates the very first, I'm very proud of that, and I'm sure he's proud of that too, first immigrant-owned climbing guide service in Oregon and Washington. So Luis, I would really explain as the shining example of the type of more mentorship that I just spoke to. I'm really grateful to have him in our community and to call him a friend. If anybody is looking for a climbing guide service or anything like that, look to Luis and Everybody Climbs for sure. Climbers of Color. So this is another organization that I'm associated with. I largely photograph mountaineering clinics for them, but it's through them that I formally learned how to ascend ropes and shoot at height on a rock wall. So meaning how to get up a rock face safely and then shoot vertically down as climbers come up. Climbers of Color, just for clarity, is based in Seattle and is a separate organization from PDX Climbers of Color. And their mission is to create diversity, equity, and inclusion in the outdoors through leadership development courses. And I've actually benefited through them. It's through them that I've learned that as a photographer and a creative, we're all also collaborators. We aren't just simply these observers that are separated from our subjects that we capture. We are participants and we are collaborators. So having been trained by them in crevasse rescue, but also being certified in wilderness first response, I play a very key role in not only capturing captivating moments on courses, but also ensuring that the safety of my friends and my community are a priority. So you see that picture on the right there, that rope that you see, I'm actually attached to it. I am on that rope team. And if anybody is to fall in a crevasse or simply hurt themselves in any way, I'm part of that rescue. My camera, the visuals, all of that stuff is very secondary in general. And so when it comes to outdoors and adventuring, we step out and we accept the weather, the terrain, and these adverse conditions, like you see here with the whiteout conditions that we're actually navigating. What we do is we band together and we get through it as a team, right? We tackle challenges as a community and we show concern for each other physically, mentally, and also our emotional well-being. So these lessons are the lessons that I actually take to heart and bring into my daily life now, and especially so with this community. These are concepts I think that are just as important off the mountain as they are on the mountain. These are things that I'd like to bring into the outdoor industry because it's these key ingredients that often go missed, especially when it comes to marketing. So in collaborating with these various organizations as a photographer and being part of PDX Climbers of Color leadership team, I found that there's a really big opportunity for us as creatives to help empower and cultivate diverse communities in the outdoors. And statistically speaking, people are more likely to opt out than opt in if they don't have the opportunity to both be and feel seen, but also to be heard and celebrated. So let's not forget that while our camera is this really essential tool to cultivate all of that, it's really only the singular piece of the puzzle that captures a single moment in time. So it doesn't speak to really how we plan, how we take up space, and how we interact with one another. So I'd really like to highlight the importance of creating and building trust, because that is a really crucial and essential component of bringing out the authenticity in people. And as a result, capturing authentic moments and really explaining these authentic narratives in the best way possible. So you should really come to it with a methodology. Give it the thought that it deserves. Reflect on it and make sure that your attentions in the end are aligned with your impact. Give it some reflection. Because remember, you're not dealing just with subjects. This isn't just talent and models, but they're collaborators, where your goal is to create a safe space for people to be able to come as their full selves, to come to you authentically, so that you can really capture that moment properly. It is the human experience that we're capturing. So approach it with care, approach it with patience, and also approach it with contagiously good spirits, just like these folks here in the photos. And so that concludes my presentation. I hope with it that you were engaged and inspired by my photos and my words, and you can see that how I'm elevating the community through the power of perspective, and hopefully you feel empowered and inspired to do the same. If you'd like to reach me, you can see my contact information up there. You can follow me on Instagram or reach me via email. And then lastly, I just want to say thank you to Kathy and Friends of the Gorge for hosting. Thank you, Linda and Ken, for sharing your incredible photos and stories. And thank you all for who've come in and tuned in for your time and attention. Appreciate it.
Hey, well, thank you, Nic. That was a beautiful presentation. And I definitely think we learned a lot from that. So I'm going to go ahead and begin the Q&A. Just a reminder to everybody who's watching, once again, feel free to type in your questions into the Q&A. I'll go ahead and get started. This was a question that came up pretty early on into the chat. Someone asked, or someone said, they're curious to hear what camera and equipment you all use. So I'll go ahead and start with Ken, then Linda, then Nic.
Yeah, I kind of am at the mid-level when it comes to the equipment that I use. I have a Nikon D500 that I use for the really fast action in flight. And I also have a Nikon Z6 II, which is my new one that allows me to be there silently. It has a no sound shutter, which I really appreciate. And most of my pictures that are wildlife are with a 200 to 500 Nikon lens, zoom lens. I have just a 24 to 70 f4 lens for the landscape pictures. Thank you.
And I happen to also use the same equipment, a Nikon D500 with a 500 millimeter lens, D850 for when I'm shooting landscapes. If I find myself in town without my camera, I will use my cell phone.
Yeah, and Linda brings up a really good point, which I think, so this question is always a really interesting one for me to answer, because I've always felt it a little frustrating, because I know that when I was trying to get into photography, hearing what other people were shooting with, and it's like, oh my gosh, this great big expensive camera, you know, and that is a barrier to entry for everybody, so not just BIPOC folks. And so when I say that, when I can tell you what I'm shooting with, but at the same time, I also want to reframe the question to say, what is the best camera for you to shoot with? It really depends on the situation. Sometimes, like Linda said, a cell phone, she carries a cell phone, I carry a cell phone. When I'm on the mountain, if I can't be safe, or if I can't just quickly pull out my phone, I'll use my phone. At my last trip, you saw the El Dorado trip, I had a GoPro. I barely took out my camera. And so there's just various forms of cameras that you can use. Maybe you don't even have access to the camera. How I started with a very entry-level camera. It was just a T2i, right? But then when I started wanting to do professional things, I went and rented it out. I rented a nice camera so that I can get that quality there, but I already had the background and the knowledge and things like that I could really, really leverage to still get into it, right? I still had the basic concepts of, you know, composition, which everything boils down to, right? And so I'm kind of going in a roundabout way of not answering your question necessarily, but trying to encourage that it doesn't matter what camera you have. I think you should just start because your value as a photographer is really what you bring to the table as far as what you've learned, what your preparation is, and things like that. Knowing your camera, it is a tool, but you are the creator, and you can create really big things with small things, right? So we don't ask painters what kind of paintbrush you're painting with. And so I don't want people to compare people as far as what kind of cameras they're trying to just to get into it, right? So
Right. I also
sorry.
like to tell people, buy the best equipment that you can to start with, and then upgrade as you go along. Every other year, I tend to upgrade either my camera body or a lens.
Yeah, and to that point, right, that these upgrades, I think it brings up a really valid point that our knowledge and skills don't depreciate as fast as our technology. So try not to value yourself by your camera, value yourself by the experience and the things that you've really delved into really deeply.
Perfect. Thank you all for sharing that. A quick follow-up question. I'm misreading that. How many hours do you each spend in the field?
Oh, man. Unbelievable numbers. I mean, I will go from sun up to sundown some days, but usually it would be a really short day out if I were out for 4 or 5 hours.
Same with me, sun up till sundown. I roll out of bed way before light even thinks about happening. I might come home for lunch, but it depends on where I'm at. If I'm an hour away from home, I just stay out in the field. I'm on a trail probably Monday through Thursday. On Friday, I work at my store. And then on Saturdays, I try to catch up on editing and seeing what I've gotten home for the week.
Yeah, mine is pretty variable. I mean, if you count training sessions, it's like, you know, I'm just out hiking and roaming about and with my camera and things like that quite often. And you know, the El Dorado trip was like a 5-day trip. So that might be out, you know, that's a lot of hours. But on the most part, yeah, like 4 or 5 hours are general, like just go out, hike, see some things, take some photos. And then there's the editing time, and that's not necessarily in the field. But sometimes, you know, I am in my car and doing some like in the field photo editing, things like that on the phone. You know, technology is something that we leverage nowadays. So
I want to follow up and say also that I roll out of bed in the morning way before it gets light, and I go to weather.com and I find out where the wind isn't blowing and where the light's going to be best. And I don't like to plan trips. I fall in love with something that is close and then show up to the best place.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. This one is actually for Linda. And I believe you answered this question in your presentation, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on it. It's how do you take photos of animals without disturbing them or stressing them out? And I'll just expand this to say that for aspiring wildlife photographers, maybe what tips do you have for them if they would like to approach wildlife?
It depends on what I'm looking for. Let's talk about pika, for example. I know where most of the pika are in the gorge. So I go to a location where I have seen pika in the past, or I expect to see pika. And I just sit down and wait quietly for them to show up. If I hear them calling to one another 100 yards away, I'll move a little closer. But I pretty much just sit and wait and watch. Often things just show up in front of you. You're hiking on a trail and a coyote runs right in front of you. So you just have to grab that moment when it's there. But if you're hiking along, you can't help but disturb them, you know, flushing birds out of the brush or disturbing whatever the coyote was doing before he ran into the path in front of you. I just move quietly, slowly, and sit and wait a lot.
Okay, and this next one, I know you and Ken both had a few pika photos. So someone asked, what is the best place to photograph a pika?
Linda, I'm going to let you take that one because you know this is your beast.
My territory.
I've only been at it a few years and seeing them.
First of all, if you wanted to join Cascades Pika Watch, you will learn where every single pika habitat is in the gorge and on both mountains. And in the gorge, they're pretty much on all of the trails behind the waterfalls. You know, go enjoy the waterfall and then take a little hike behind the waterfall. Anywhere you see a talus, which is a rock slide looking slope, where the boulders are basketball size, is a good habitat for pika. And that's on both sides of the river, by the way. The Washington side has a little bit shorter territory than the Oregon side because the sun comes from the south and shines more on the Washington side. So a lot of the pikas on the Washington side are on the other side of the cliffs.
And this one is a bit of a specific question. When you take photos of birds, do you sometimes use your car as a sort of duck blind so they don't see you and fly away?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, short answer.
I think of Ridgefield is just phenomenal. I took a picture there where a hawk flew onto a post at my minimum distance just a couple of weeks ago, and then it just yawned, and that was featured on ebird.org, and I did nothing except show up. I did nothing except be there, and that hawk was not concerned about me because I was in a vehicle, and hundreds of vehicles go around that, and so they just completely filter you out and offers you things opportunities you just are not going to get, like walking at Steiger Wall.
So this question, I'm going to change it a little bit for the three of you, but Ken and Linda, if you can answer, what is your best or favorite animal to shoot? And then Nic, perhaps you can tell us your favorite place to go shooting. So I'll start with Ken first.
I'm going to just go with the animal that I want to shoot the most, because I have tried so many times to get great shots of them. The short-eared owl. I love owls, and so any opportunity that I can get to see an owl, photograph an owl, long-eared, short-eared, great horned. I love owls.
And I just have too many to list. I love whatever is right in front of me.
Yeah.
Seriously, I love them all.
Yeah, my favorite. Yeah, that's a really hard question, to be honest, because there's so many beautiful places in the area, right? But I will say the first area that I really learned to explore and I really loved was the enchantments over in Leavenworth. And so doing the loop and learning, and I actually learned a ton of skills out there with my camera and just being outside, to be honest, and backpacking that loop.
Okay. So Flora says she's really impressed by Ken and Linda's photos of tiny, fast kinglets and warblers. If you two don't mind, how do you usually take these photos? It seems that they have a hard time seeing them as well.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
You just look for movement in the trees to find them, and then keep practicing. You train your camera to go where your eye goes. They're really difficult to photograph, but just keep practicing. That's all you can do. And not all of my photos turn out as great as the ones I showed you tonight.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, finding them, I think my superpower is my ears. I have good hearing, and I am able to tell the species before I see it. 90% of the time, I hear them before I see them. And since I know the species, I know where to look. I know whether it's going to be lower, whether it's going to be higher. And so I then look and see what direction they're moving. And if they're moving a particular direction, I will go way out ahead of them and then just set my tripod down and wait for them to come by. And in places like in Catherine Creek, that's pretty easy because they're all funneled into these canyons and riparian at the base of the gulches.
Okay. And this one is for Nic, but feel free others if you have something you'd like to say on the subject. This question is, what are some real ways to bring groups of diverse backgrounds together?
Oh, interesting. Make friends. I feel like making true connections is really where it's at. And that's actually, I would say, where the true value is at, right? Like we can create these momentary moments, we can have an event, right? But sometimes those things turn into just moments of passing. And I think where we actually gain some value is to have those relationships where we can create bonds and really understand each other. And so maybe this is an indirect way of answering that, but make some friends, they will have some friends, and then create an event, right? So I think that is kind of where I would start, is to really just start from that seed and allow that to grow.
Great answer.
Okay, a follow-up question to that. Nic, could you talk about the challenge of authenticity in capturing images of BIPOC, LGBTQ community members and others in the outdoors?
The challenges. Yeah, so it like sometimes it's a little bit scary because it feels like you're, as a creative, you're capturing what you see and you're kind of like this external entity, right? And trying to figure out what is authentic, and maybe you aren't actually part of that group. I'm a cisgendered heterosexual male, and so going to LGBTQ group, it is a little foreign to me. But again, like that's where that bond and that connection and creating those relationships really helps overcome some of those barriers, and really listening to people, being vulnerable, you will likely make some mistakes. And I think that's also like a challenge is, we all have this ego and we don't want to make mistakes. We want to be right. We want our opinions to be right also. But I come at it as very readily to be wrong and to be corrected, and actually wanting to be corrected so that I'm on that correct path. And so I think that those are some of the challenges, and some of the ways to get around it is just practice humility, practice some vulnerability, and that is usually mirrored right back at you, to be honest. And so that's how you'll be able to capture that authenticity.
Very well said. So this is a question for everyone. How often do you choose to enjoy a moment rather than taking a photo?
Well, I kind of do both. I can see through my viewfinder, and then I'll put my camera aside. It just depends on how much time I have. That's a hard question, because yeah, when you see something right in front of you, you want to grab a picture of it before it leaves.
Yeah, I don't know how to separate the two. When I'm out, I have my camera, and I feel like it's just a tool that is part of me. And so my response is to often to record that moment. That's a great question, but again, I don't know how to separate the two.
Was that a question for me as well?
Yes.
Oh, it was. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if so sometimes there is a separation, and I'm kind of like Ken, sometimes there is not a separation at all. I'm still like in my emotions as I'm capturing the moment, and I love it that much. But there are some moments where I just want to be with people and make that connection. And that camera, it's not necessarily a barrier, but sometimes it just makes it a little bit more full to put it aside and to just feel and absorb the time and the energy of people. And it's a fine balance, I'll say.
I will say that for me, that's a lot easier to do when it comes to being around people versus wildlife, because I feel like a camera can be a barrier. Like if I am constantly shooting my grandkids and not being grandpa to them and interacting with them, that's not a good thing. And so I often will just leave my camera at home when I am going and being with them.
Okay, here's another group for everyone, all of the panelists. How do you overcome the frustration of not getting the perfect shot?
I laugh. I never expect to get the perfect shot. If it's something that I really care about, which is all wildlife, all I can do is my best. And that's what I bring on every hike is my best. I'm ready. I've practiced in my garden. And I often, if I get a really good shot, I just feel lucky.
Me, Ken, which I don't know. I'll
Go
go
ahead.
first.
Whoever wants.
Okay. I really relish in like happy accidents and just being in the moment, and the perfect shots end up coming because of those moments and not really expecting them. Sometimes it's really easy to get into the mindset of curating, and that I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes. But a lot of times the best and the perfect shots that I find are always like they tend to be for me those happy accidents, like, oh my gosh, that was just a really great moment. And I just happened to be able to be in the right space. I had some methodology and thought about where I was at and things like that, but I was at the ready. And so I, came back to like some of the skills and things like that that I've already accrued and was able to capture it. But it was just an authentic moment and then happy accident.
Yeah, I would say that one of the coolest things is there are hardly any shots that I have, and I think, oh, that is just perfect. But what that does is it just hangs a carrot out there for next time, because hey, I can go out again. If I don't like that Harrier shot, that Harrier is going to come by me tomorrow, and I love that invitation.
Okay, so we have two questions about nighttime photography. So I'm going to open it up to the group. Can any of you tell us tips and equipment that you might use for taking photos of night skies? And if you do nighttime photography with animals, can any of you tell us a little bit about that?
So I don't have any experience with animals, mostly like stars and the Milky Way. Some of the things that are really helpful is to have a tripod. That's definitely key because you need the camera to be still since it's a long exposure. Generally mine for like Milky Way shots are between 10 and 30 seconds. Some people will do longer. It just really depends on the situation and what you're looking for, because the longer it is, you'll see star trails and things like that to develop. Outside of a tripod, I would say, so that to reduce movement, you can put a bag on the tripod, bag of rocks, bag of weights, something to weight it down so it moves less. And then also have a remote shutter. So either directly connected or it could be like remotely connected. I have my phone, which connects to my camera also, which I can actually see through the viewfinder and see what it's actually taking photos of, and use that as my remote shutter. And so those are kind of my key tips. There's some more technical stuff, but as far as equipment, I would say that those are some key things I can think of off the top of my head.
And I agree with you. I don't shoot animals at night because I would never shine a light on them. But I do chase the Aurora Borealis, and the same thing, remote on a tripod, and just hope the lights show up.
Yeah, I want to share a photo that I have, and this was about as close as I get tonight. This was a short-eared owl that came by me out at Ridgeville, and I just want to say that the software today, the photo editing software for removing noise is amazing, and some of the mirrorless cameras like my Z6 II do allow you to shoot at really high ISOs. Like the short-eared owl that I shot last week was at 12,800, and it's actually a usable photo. And so I haven't shot a lot of nighttime photography, but just getting really, really dark. That photo of that short-eared owl was, it was too dark. I was just really surprised. I actually took that with my D500, which isn't good at low light.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I'm going to ask one last question, and then we can go ahead and start wrapping this up. But, and this is kind of a personal question that I have as an amateur photographer myself. What is your advice or message for photographers who are just picking up their first camera for the first time?
Have fun.
Have fun is right. Yeah, get out there and shoot and try things and see what works for you, and find things that get you excited.
Yeah, I would say definitely have fun. Stick to the things that you like, because that's really what's going to bring you the furthest, right? And then I kind of want to bring it back to just the very first question, kind of close the loop there, that like your value and your impact that you can create in the world isn't necessarily based off of that camera. That's your tool. We don't measure people who can build houses off of off of their hammers, right? And so it's kind of weird for us to think of that in the same fashion with cameras, especially because technology accelerates so fast. So don't look at the barriers, look at that as a barrier, because there's so much opportunity to learn. There's so many things to capture, and you have your own niche and your own interests and the things that you're passionate about. And when you really delve into that, into the things that you're authentically interested in, I think the world really, they also value that, and they also gain from that. And that would be my key thing for people. Just go into your interests and your authentic pieces like that.
Perfect answer.
So I lied. That was not the last question. Someone just popped in with a question and see it when someone asked, how might photographing quote unquote ugly subjects such as clear cuts, etc., be a way to inspire others to want to protect and restore our outdoors? So I'll sort of reframe that question of necessarily how do you maybe inspire folks to sort of care about the outdoors and again want to protect it.
So for me, I think it goes back to my why and my purpose that I stated in my presentation, right? Was everything's kind of like to engage, inspire, and elevate others through perspective. And really, it's not necessarily the photo that I'm inspiring them with. I think that's just like that seed, that first piece that really creates discussion around the topic. And then it's really, the things that I know and I'm, again, passionate about, and that conversation that we can delve into a little bit deeper. And I think that's the big piece is that conversation and sharing those perspectives and why it is important. And so like my photography, I will say, is essentially more so a starting point.
I just, as I think about when I share my photography, probably the people that I end up sharing the most with it will be the middle school and high school kids that I engage with. And I find that like when the students are sharing their climate stories with me and they talk about what it is that they are most concerned about, over 50 to 60% of them, their object of concern is wildlife. And so they are highly concerned about this, and it doesn't take much as far as photography and talking about it to get those passions stirred up, because it is something that a lot of them care about.
Yeah, and I share my photos too, in the hope that people will care as much as whether it's the animal or the land or the water or the sky, the air. I want people to care as much as I do. And that's why I like to share my photography with others.
Perfect. Thank you so much, all three of you, for your insight and for sharing all of your work with us. I think that's a great note to end on. And I don't know about the rest of you watching, but personally, I'm feeling very inspired to just get out there on the gorge in the mountains and sort of try my own hand at photography. So I'm hoping you all are feeling the same way as well. I'll go ahead and wrap it up by saying, a quick reminder about our photo contest. Definitely feel free to submit any and all photos of the gorge. We want to encourage everyone to feel welcome and encourage to submit your work. I know Nick said it beautifully in the beginning of the Q&A. You don't need professional equipment to get started. You know, go on a hike, bring your cell phone, a mobile phone, like take some photos. You know, you could be the next Ken Pitts and Linda Steider and Nic Raingsey, and you just don't even know it yet. So definitely just go out there and just try something. And if you enjoyed this webinar and you want to see more, please stay tuned. We have more webinars coming up, including one in January on winter well-being and mindfulness in the gorge. We'll be hearing from natural social scientist Ellen Donahue and our very own executive director, Kevin Gorman from Friends. And they'll be talking about how connections to nature help cultivate a lasting sense of personal well-being, and in turn, how it aids efforts in protecting, stewarding, and in the Columbia Gorge. And on that note, I hope you all have an incredible night, and thank you all for joining us this evening. And I will say, if any of you want to reach out to any of these photographers, feel free to send Friends of Columbia Gorge an email, and I'll go ahead and get you in touch with them. Okay. Thank you all again. Thank you, Nick, Ken, and Linda, and thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you, Cassie.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Cassie.
Thank you.